The holidays are fast approaching, and for international travelers, people begin to think about the ideal tourist spots, especially the countries in Southeast Asia. But meanwhile, let's shift our gear to the nation of China. Now, based on the report, that Vietnam is forecast to welcome more than 22 million travelers this year, and especially with the increasing arrivals from China. Now, it is hard to believe that today, when we look at this cultural and also this political engagement between between China and Vietnam at this moment. And how do we believe that with a rising number of Chinese tourists, and this could actually boost the domestic economy for Vietnam at this moment? But meanwhile, let's pay attention to another close country, which is North Korea. Experts believe that today, North Korea, given the fact that, again, not only continuing with the missile testing, and also strongly against the idea that U.S. should bring diplomatic approach to the strategy. But meanwhile, people are very concerned that North Korea is trying to use Vietnam as a way to avoid the UN sanctions. It's going to look like a very busy year ahead of us. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to invite our distinguished speaker, who's the Dr. Hai Hong-Nguyen. Again, Dr. Hai is a political scientist, and his expertise on international relations, especially related to Vietnam, China, and many countries in Southeast Asia. Well, Dr. Hai, and welcome back to The Missing Piece.
Thank you very much as well. I'm very happy to be back on the show with you, Will.
Well, again, Dr. Hai, such an honor to have you back on the show. Let's talk about what I mentioned, the first portion of our conversation. Again, based on the report that the Vietnamese government is targeting 25 million tourist arrival this year, but meanwhile, that we're also expecting more arrivals from China. Now, again, previously, you and I would discuss the political engagement between Vietnam and China. But how about the good news that Chinese tourists are flooding to Vietnam? How much do you think that such move can actually boost the domestic economy for the nation of Vietnam? Your thoughts?
Well, look, Vietnam has been a very, favorable destinations of Chinese traveler. And if you look at the data before COVID-19, and if people came to Vietnam before COVID-19, more particularly the provinces and the cities that have the borders with China, then you would see a lot of Chinese tourists. And when the COVID-19 broke out, then of course because of the closures of the borders, and that's why the Chinese traveler could not go to Vietnam, and of course we have seen less Chinese traveler to Vietnam. But then when Vietnam's opened its border again, and of course when China's opened its border for its own citizens traveling around the world, and Chinese travelers coming back to Vietnam, and of course this day I think is this is very for Vietnamese. Is of course very happy and welcomes international tourists to Vietnam, and of course because Vietnam is a neighbor, it has very beautiful landscape and a lot of services, and I think that's why Vietnam has becomes a very popular and a favorable destination for Chinese traveler. Now, of course, Vietnam consider tourism as one of the key industry that boosts the economy. And of course, tourism has contributed to, very high economic growth of Vietnam in the past 5 years, and more recently, of course, as you see, the number of international travelers to Vietnam has increased year by year, and as you mentioned, 22 million international travelers are expected to arrive in Vietnam. So tourism is becoming a very important sector in Vietnam economy, and that's why the Vietnamese government has made a lot of investments in modernizing the infrastructures and improving the services. um, I think this is more significant when we look at the international markets these days, and also why Vietnam's economic growth still heavily relied on exports. So tourism is a sector that also make a great contribution to the economic target and the economic growth rate, which set out by the Vietnamese government of more than 8% this year. So I think on the other hand, tourism creates a lot of job for Vietnamese people,
Mm.
and and that's why I think it's not only about the money that tourism brings about for Vietnam, but again it creates jobs, which is also very important to give the stability and also to on the other hand, improve the life of the people. So yeah, I think tourism will be playing more important in Vietnam's economy, and of course, particularly when Vietnam's Vietnamese governments emphasize the service industries. So, and that's why, I'm sure that in the year to come, tourism will still be a very important key sectors in
Mm.
Vietnam economy.
Mm. Well, again, Dr. Hai, there's no surprise. I remember last time I visited Vietnam and throughout the country. Again, I agree with you 100% that Vietnam has been one of the fascinating and, of course, one of the historical countries in Southeast Asia. Not only the landscape, but also the hospitality of the people, and needless to say, that the mouth-watering food and continue to lure international travelers to the country. Now, again, based on the Bloomberg report, that in September this year, the Vietnam has overtaken Thailand as the top travel destination for Chinese tourists, and the shift is being driven by a wave of independent Chinese travelers, and report says. But meanwhile, let's talk about another perspective behind the increased tourism in Vietnam, which is the reputation of Vietnam. And again, we talk about from this geopolitical change, Vietnam stand at the crossroads, especially we look at the trade relationships and also we look at the complication of the politics. But meanwhile, how do you think the country of Vietnam will continue to brand itself as from this cultural, from the social aspect, and without inviting people to think about from this political perspective? Again, when we look at the countries in Southeast Asia today, like the Philippines, the Thailand, and Cambodia, etc., travelers are very concerned about the political reasons when they choose or when they make choices for traveling a destination. How do you think Vietnam should brand itself or is branding itself as 100% from the cultural engagement, but not from this political concerns? Your thoughts?
Well, I think we'll look the development of a country, more particularly when they want to, make the countries more, hospitable and friendly to international visitors.
Mm.
I think the most important issue for international visitors is the political stability, right?
Mm.
And then, of course, now the landscapes, the cultures, the people, as you mentioned, are also very key factors. However, political stability is very important. Now, we look at the political landscape in Southeast Asia and also, more broadly across the world. I think Vietnam's really emerged as one of a very spotlight in terms of political stability. On the other hand, Vietnam is increasingly opening its door to the outside world. So I think it's clearly demonstrate that the people, the Vietnamese people, really, and on the other hand, I think is a great a success of the governments in maintaining its legitimacy in bringing the good life for the people, and that's why it earns the trust and earns the support of its people. Now then, it turns and it transforms into the social capital, and that's why it creates more attractive, to international travelers. Now, and I think now in the world today, I completely agree that, of course, for tourism or for the investments, the culture, the law is very important. But if we look at the country as a whole entity, right, we have to put all together all the factors, including political aspects and political dimension. So you can't separate political dimension from economics, cultures, or social dimensions. So, and as a whole entity, you have to look, into all of those dimensions. So I think for Vietnam, if you look at and even if you count all of those dimensions separately, then you can see, and if you can, make a tick marks, right? And with 10 is the highest score and 1 is the lowest score. Then, in terms of political stability, in terms of political environment, then, I would not give, of course, 10, but, it can be 9 or 8, comparing to the political environment in other Southeast Asian countries. Now, if you look at even the conflict between Cambodia and Thailand recently, it's still going on, and also in the Philippines, in Indonesia, the protest, demonstration, etc. Then people will ask about the political stability and also, of course, security, safety. And then, and it, now, if you come to economic dimension and cultural and people, hospitality, etc. So each of those dimensions, if you can tick, in the box, then of course Vietnam, is always on a very high level. So when people, international travelers, look at Vietnam, then they see all of those boats with a very high rate. Then there's no doubt that Vietnam is becoming a very popular destination, and of course the Vietnamese people is fully aware of the importance of political stability and political dimension, and that's why I think since the war in Vietnam ended in 1975, and also even after the brief conflicts between Vietnam and China in 1979, also with the Khmer Rouge back in 1978, 1979, then Vietnam political stability is always on the agenda of the governments. And the government is paying a lot of attention to, maintain political stability, etc. Because, in countries like Vietnam, where there's only one party in power, political stability is very important. Okay, and it's always considered as the foundation for economic development.
Of course, Dr. Hai, you said it. I mean, no travelers would love to tap into the country where it's under a great stress of conflict or international wars. Now, I want to bring the second topic into our conversation, again related to Vietnam, but also linked to another crucial country in Asia, which is North Korea. Now, the report came out that there's a possibility that today North Korea is trying to use Vietnam to avoid UN sanctions. And again, Dr. Hai, you and I, we briefly discussed about North Korea previously. Of course, that we know that today North Korea, it's fundamentally a different country under the same leader, who is Kim Jong-un. And again, he's a different person with a personality. But meanwhile, that today it's believed that North Korea is trying to carry out what they called a quote, a small node strategy. Now, the small node strategy is best understood as risk spreading. Rather than relying on a few large conduits vulnerable to disruptions, North Korea cultivates a web of routine, low visibility touch point that appear marginal in isolation but collectively sustain its external research or external reach. So, Dr. Hai, from your perspective, how much do we believe that North Korea today is trying and quietly to use Vietnam to avoid the UN sanction? And why do you think, or how do you think, that Vietnam is reacting to the report or reacting to the help from North Korea? Your thoughts?
Well, between Vietnam and North Korea, the two, communist countries, they have, a traditional relationships back in 1950s, right? And of course, there has been up and downs in the relationship between the two communist countries, given the political, developments in each countries. However, as I said, because they are both communist countries and they still maintain traditional relationships. And when Vietnam opened its economy to the outside world, and it has been very successful, and of course emerging a economic powerhouse in Asia after 40 years of đổi mới. So of course, any comparison is not really relevant because you have to look into and count on the internal conditions of each country. But generally, the two countries has only one party in power. And of course, now Vietnam had a war with the United States, right? And of course, North Korea also had war with the United States in the 1950s, etc. So somehow the two countries share, a lot of similarities. But of course, in North Korea, they asked the question why Vietnam, could have been able to normalize diplomatic relations with the United States and has developed the relationship with the United States with its former enemy. And of course, the diplomatic relations between Vietnam and the United States now is at the highest level in the diplomatic hierarchy of Vietnam's diplomacy as the comprehensive strategic partnership. So I think it's quite normal when in North Korea they ask the question why Vietnam could have been doing so with the United States, and that's why they really want to look at and learn from Vietnam's model. Now, of course, because of the nuclear programs, carried out by the North Korean successive governments, and of course with successive leaders, and Kim Jong Un's now, of course, still the Kim family. But North Korea has faced sanctions from the United Nations and international community. Not, of course, not all, but yeah, technically, of course, it faced sanctions imposed by the United Nations, more particularly Western countries. But now, I would say, I just want to put a footnote here on international efforts to prevent North Korea from, producing and making nuclear weapons has failed. And I'm sure that the United States now, acknowledge that fact that, of course, North Korea now is a nuclear power. Uh, so I think now it's all those efforts failed. So how we can keep the old model or the old thinkings going when those efforts already failed. So I think somehow, the United States and also the United Nations should be aware of, that kind of outdated, thinking and, the failure. And of course, North Korea, of course, now they are, opening to the outside world. As you see, under Kim Jong Un leadership, it has been, of course, reaching out to even, Russia's now and of course China, of course Vietnam. So I think again, and when North Korea reach out to Vietnam, I think they're trying to, send a message to every countries that first, it really want to learn, the model from Vietnam. Second, is also a message to both China and Russia that, of course, it has other card to play. It has other channel to go out to the outside world. It's not only, entirely relying on China or Russia. So, and of course, for Vietnam, Vietnam's foreign policy is that, of course, it keeps, relationship and, of course, deepen relationship with traditional friends, right? So North Korea is traditional friends, of course, not given the fact that, Vietnam also emphasize the relationship with neighboring countries. Now, if, depending on how you define the concept neighboring country. So if you look at Asia, Southeast Asia as the whole region, right, is something like in a village. So we can say Asian village, say for instance. So anyone in that Asian village, then it can be his own neighbor, right? So it really depends on how you define it, how you define the scope and also the boundaries of that kinds of relationships. And so, North Korea is not only traditional friends, but also a neighboring countries. So Vietnam, of course, welcome to, of course, North Korea. And, you know that back in 2019, and for after many years, not given the fact that of course the Kim Jong Un and Donald Trump summit in Hanoi, but for many years, the first North Korean leaders visited Vietnam. So I think since 2019, of course, the relationship between North Korea and Vietnam has been improved, and of course also vice versa with the visits by the Vietnamese Communist Party leaders to Pyongyang. It has been also for decades too for a Vietnamese, the top leaders visited North Korea. So I think the relationship between Vietnam and North Korea now has been improved, and of course, and again, North Korea really want to expand and develop further and deepen relationship with North Korea. Not given the fact that, of course, Vietnam is a channel for North Korea to go to the outside world, but of course, and again, it has the opportunity to learn from Vietnam experience and model. And of course, with Vietnam's development and of course reputation and position in Asia, Southeast Asia, and also in the world today, I think having good relationship with Vietnam is also a credit for North Korea too.
Well, Dr. Hai, I want to wrap up our conversation by asking you the last question. Again, you mentioned both China and Russia. Let's bring another country into our conversation, which is America. We know, looking beyond 2025, looking into 2026, that for America, for the Trump administration, normalizing the relationship with North Korea or rekindle the relationship between North Korea and US, it's rather crucial. And again, we know not only the nation of Japan, South Korea are very concerned about North Korea, and also many other neighboring countries too. Now, previously, that U.S. tried to seek ways from China in order to get a better help and support to counter against North Korea. But today, as you mentioned before, Vietnam, it's also a crucial role or can be a crucial player to help in terms of normalizing the relationship between U.S. and North Korea at this moment. So, Dr. Hai, from your perspective, briefly, how much do you think that in this upcoming year or upcoming years that U.S. could find a leverage with Vietnam in order to seek better or more effective ways to deal with North Korea through the channel of Vietnam? Your final thoughts.
Well, let's go back to the summit between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump in 2019 first. So I think back that times, U.S. President Donald Trump already, mentioned that Vietnam could be a good example for North Korea to learn from and to open its, economy and also to develop. So I think and now of course Trump's returned to the White House, and of course Trump still doing want to do something with North Korea, and of course he want to go into the his story as the American or U.S. president to improve the relationship with North Korea. And I think, yes, and I mentioned before, North Korea really looking at Vietnam as a good example, how Vietnam normalize and also develop the relationship with the United States. Now, I just want to put a footnote here is that not only North Korea, but also Cuba. Cuba is also learning from Vietnam, how Vietnam, of course, develop and have very good relationship with the United States now. And I think, as I said, the international community, more particularly the West, the United States, should acknowledge the fact that North Korea now is a nuclear power. Right. And again, as I mentioned before, that all those efforts, all those preventive diplomacy and preventive efforts by the United States and the West to prevent North Korea from possessing nuclear powers has led to a failure. So I think they have to look at the fact. And they have to acknowledge that fact in order to think of a new way to have relationship with North Korea. I don't think if the United States or any countries now in the world that they can convince North Korea to give up or to destroy its nuclear weapons. Right. So I don't think so. More particularly when, of course, if the United States and the West in having or implementing a hostile policy to North Korea. So the more hostile the policy of the United States or the West towards North Korea, of course, the more determined that North Korea to develop and to give its nuclear weapons. and of course to expand its nuclear weapon stock. So I think the best way for the United States and also other Western countries is that they have to acknowledge the fact that North Korea is now is a nuclear powers. So what can the United States or the West do is that of course they need to engage with North Korea in order to open the society, to bring North Korea to the international community or to the global village. Then, of course, because at the end of the day, whether the now if the West still have any intentions to remove the Kim regimes or etc. It should be in the hand of North Korean people rather than in the West or the people in the White House or in any Western capitals. So I think the best way is to bring the North Korean people into the international community, international village. That's the best way. So that once it's open, so the United States can come to North Korea. They don't need to go through other channel, not go to the third party, etc. They can deal with directly with North Korea. And of course, Vietnam in that process, of course, is willing to bridge any gaps. And of course, Vietnam is willing to play a more significant role in bringing North Korea and United States or and the West together as it did in 2019. So Vietnam is one way, a really good example, and also willing to act more actively and play important role in that kind of normalizing the relationship between North Korea and the United States and the West.
Of course, again, looking ahead, Dr. Hai, 2026 will be surely another busy year for the international community. But meanwhile, again, for the Trump administration, the relationship with North Korea is crucial. And also, rumor has it that the sitting U.S. President Donald Trump is looking forward.
Frozen.
Dr. Hai, can you hear me right now? Dr. Hai, can you hear me right now?
Yeah.
Okay, very good. All right, let's just keep going with it. Again, Dr. Hai, I agree with you 100%. 2026 is going to be another busy year for the international community. Again, the relationship between U.S. and North Korea, it's rather crucial. And also, rumor has it that sitting U.S. President Donald Trump is scheduled to visit China in 2026. And then surely the conversation of North Korea will be brought up at some point. Well, again, ladies and gentlemen, it's such an honor to speak to Dr. Hai Hong Nguyen. Again, Dr. Hai, it's a political scientist. He's the expert, especially regarding the political change and also the social changes in the nation of Vietnam. And I strongly encourage everyone go online to connect with Dr. Hai. Again, Dr. Hai, thank you so much for your time. And we're looking forward to having more discussions with you regarding the international community. So thank you so much for doing this.